The war room of the flagship Axiom of Silence was cold and dark, the way Grand Commander Rolkis liked it. He stood at the center of a massive holographic star map, his long gray fingers tracing the edges of conquered systems. 400 worlds, 400 victories. His name was carved into the history of the Veshan Dominion as the greatest military mind in 1,000 years, and he intended to keep it that way. Around him, his officers waited in silence. They knew better than to speak before he did. "We need a new target," Rolkis said. His voice was calm, almost bored. Conquest had become routine for him. He no longer felt the thrill of it. He needed something to remind the Dominion why they feared him, why they respected him, why they gave him everything he asked for. A junior officer stepped forward. He was young and eager, and he pointed to the far edge of the star map, where the galaxy's outer arm spiraled into darkness. "There is a system here, Grand Commander. Sol, a single inhabited world. They call it Earth." Rolkis looked at the tiny dot on the map. It was so far from everything that it barely registered. "What do we know about them?" War analyst Pravan moved to the display and pulled up the data files. Pravan was the smartest person on the ship, and everyone knew it, including Rolkis, which was why he tolerated the analyst's nervous habits. Pravan's hands were always moving, always fidgeting with something. "The species calls itself human," Pravan said. "They are relatively young. They developed short-range warp travel only recently. Their military technology is basic compared to ours. Population of approximately 9 billion on a single world." Rolkis smiled. 9 billion. That is a lot of workers for our mining colonies. The officers laughed. Pravan did not. "I need to run the planetary classification," Pravan said. He entered Earth's environmental data into the Dominion's standard system. Every world they conquered was rated on a scale from Class 1, which meant completely harmless, to Class 10, which meant extreme danger, requiring full military commitment. In all of the Dominion's history, only 3 worlds had ever rated Class 10, and Rolkis had conquered 2 of them personally. The system processed the data. Then it stopped. Then it processed again. Pravan frowned and recalibrated the sensors. The system ran a 3rd time. The result appeared on the screen, and the entire war room went quiet. Class 15. Pravan stared at it. The scale did not go to 15. The scale had never gone past 10. The system had created a new number, because the existing ones were not enough. "That is a malfunction," Rolkis said flatly. "I ran it 3 times, Grand Commander. Fix it, and run it again." Pravan opened his mouth to argue, then closed it. He knew that tone. He nodded and stepped back, but his hands were shaking in a way they had never shaken before. After the briefing, Sub-Commander Thyan found Pravan alone in the data room. Thyan was Rolkis's second-in-command, a careful and quiet officer who had survived dozens of campaigns by paying attention to the things Rolkis ignored. "Tell me about the Class 15, Thyan said. Pravan looked at him for a long moment, then pulled up the data. "The planet's gravity is nearly 3 times what our species is comfortable with. The atmosphere is a corrosive, oxidizing mix. The surface is covered in water that contains salt and is filled with predatory creatures. The weather systems include storms that would be classified as planetary-scale weapons on any other world. Hurricanes, tsunamis, earthquakes, volcanic eruptions. And the species?" Pravan's voice dropped. "They are endurance predators. They evolved to chase prey until it collapsed from exhaustion. Their bodies heal from injuries that would kill most galactic species. They can survive in almost every environment on their planet, from frozen wastelands to burning deserts. They have been waging war on each other for their entire recorded history, which spans thousands of years. They have never stopped fighting. Not once." Thyan felt something cold settle in his stomach. Every species fights. Not like this. Pravan pulled up more data. They developed the ability to split atoms, nuclear fission, and the first thing they did with it was build a weapon and use it on their own kind. They dropped it on a city full of civilians, then they built more. They built enough to destroy their own planet several times over, and they pointed them at each other and dared each other to attack first. They lived like this for decades. Thien said nothing. There is more, Pravan continued. They have a concept with no equivalent in our language. The closest translation is spite. It means doing something harmful to yourself, specifically to cause harm to your enemy. They will destroy themselves to destroy you. They consider this honorable. That is insane. Yes, Pravan agreed. That is the point. Thien left the data room without another word. He thought about telling Rolkis what he had learned. He thought about recommending they choose a different target. But he knew Rolkis. The Grand Commander had never retreated from anything in his life, and he was not going to start now because of a number on a screen. The fleet launched 3 days later. 1,200 warships, the largest force the Dominion had assembled in a generation. Rolkis stood on the bridge of the Axiom of Silence and watched the stars stretch into lines as they entered warp. He was smiling. Behind him, Thien stood in silence. He was not smiling. And in his quarters, deep in the belly of the flagship, Pravan sat alone with Earth's cultural database open on his screen. He had been reading for hours. He read about soldiers who threw themselves onto explosives to save the people next to them. He read about a city that was burned to the ground and rebuilt 7 times. He read about people who were trapped under collapsed buildings for days and clawed their way out with broken fingers. He read about something called the will to live, and he realized it was not just a phrase to these creatures. It was a weapon. It was the most dangerous weapon he had ever seen. He closed the database and sat in the dark for a long time. His hands would not stop shaking. He understood something that Rolkis did not. Something that Thien was only beginning to suspect. They were not flying toward a conquest. They were flying toward a predator. And the predator already knew they were coming. Yoon Sarah was on her 4th cup of coffee when the alarm went off. She had been working a quiet night shift in the Deep Space Monitoring Center, buried 200 meters beneath the mountains of the Korean Peninsula. The screens in front of her showed nothing but the usual noise of the universe. Comets, radiation bursts, the slow spin of distant galaxies. Then, at exactly 0247 local time, 1,200 new signatures appeared at the edge of the solar system. Sarah set down her coffee. She did not panic. She did not gasp. She looked at the signatures for exactly 4 seconds, confirming they were real, confirming their trajectory, confirming their speed. Then she pressed a single button on her console. That button activated Protocol Zero, the global defense network that Earth had spent 30 years building in secret. Within minutes, every military installation on the planet and in orbit received the same message. It was short and simple. They are coming. Supreme Commander Han Do-hyun was awake within 15 minutes. He was a man who slept lightly and dressed quickly, habits he had developed over decades of military service. By the time he arrived at the command center, his senior staff was already assembled. Kang Nari was the first to brief him. She was Earth's leading expert on alien species, a xenobiologist who had spent 10 years studying every piece of alien intelligence humanity had ever gathered. She was calm and precise, and she spoke the way a doctor speaks when delivering a diagnosis. The Veshan Dominion, Nari said. 1,200 warships. They are a military empire that has conquered over 400 worlds. Their standard approach is to demand surrender, then overwhelm with superior numbers. Most species give up before the fighting even starts. Do-hyun looked at the star map. The fleet was still far away, months from arrival, but it was moving steadily toward them. And when a species does not give up? Nari paused. It has never happened. Not on this scale. Every species they have targeted has either surrendered or been destroyed within days. Then they have never fought a world that wanted to fight back, Do-hyun said quietly. Nari met his eyes. No, Commander, they have not. Ground Forces General Cho Tae-ho leaned forward. He was an old soldier with a scarred face and hands like stone. He had fought in every major conflict Earth had seen in the last 30 years, and he treated the news of an alien invasion the same way he treated everything else, as a problem that needed a solution. How long do we have? Tae-ho asked. 3 months, Sarah answered from her station, based on their current speed. That is enough. It was enough because Earth had been preparing for this moment since the first time it made contact with alien life 3 decades ago. That contact had been brief and peaceful. A small trading vessel passing through the system. But it had taught humanity a critical lesson. The galaxy was not empty. It was full of civilizations, and many of them were predators. Humanity looked at the galaxy and made a decision. They would not be prey. In the 30 years since, Earth had quietly transformed itself into a fortress. Orbital defense platforms floated in space, disguised as communication satellites. Entire cities had been rebuilt with underground bunker networks that could shelter millions. A fleet of stealth warships had been constructed in hidden shipyards on the dark side of the moon, including the Iron Wake, commanded by Captain Park Ji-nu. Ji-nu was young for a captain, but no one questioned his command. He had grown up on the volcanic coastlines of Jeju Island, where the sea was rough and the ground shook without warning. He had learned to survive before he learned to fight, and he had learned to fight before he learned to speak in full sentences. His crew loved him, because he never asked them to do anything he would not do himself, and they feared him, because he would do almost anything. When the alert reached the Iron Wake, Ji-nu gathered his crew on the bridge. He told them simply that a fleet was coming to take their home, and that they were going to stop it. There were no speeches, no dramatic words. His crew nodded and went to work. Kang Nari gave her most important briefing 2 days later, in a room full of generals and admirals who needed to understand what they were about to face, and more importantly, what the enemy was about to face. The Veshan Dominion does not understand what Earth is, Nari began. Their classification system rates planetary danger on a scale of 1 to 10. Earth broke that scale. The system rated us Class 15, and I want you to understand why. She brought up images of Earth. Not the pretty ones from travel advertisements, but the real ones. A hurricane tearing apart a coastline. A volcano burying a city in ash. A great white shark launching itself out of the ocean. A microscopic image of a bacterium that could kill most alien species in hours. Our gravity will crush them. Our atmosphere will burn their lungs. Our water will poison them. Our bacteria will eat them alive. Our weather will destroy anything they build on the surface. And that is before we even fire a single weapon. She paused to let that sink in. We are not defending a world. We are unleashing one. The planet itself is our greatest weapon. We evolved here. We survived here. We thrived here. Everything that makes Earth a nightmare for them is home to us. She looked around the room at the faces of the men and women who would lead this fight. They think they are invading a planet. They are wrong. They are walking into the mouth of something that has been chewing up and spitting out species for 4 billion years. We are just the latest thing it produced, and we are the most dangerous thing it has ever made. The room was silent for a long moment. Then Cho Tae-ho smiled, a rare and unsettling sight, and said, I like our chances. Over the next 3 months, Earth prepared. Sarah calibrated the orbital defense grid until it could track a sparrow from orbit. Tae-ho dug his soldiers into every mountain, jungle, and city on the planet. Ji-nu took the Iron Wake and 12 stealth destroyers to the outer system, hiding in the shadow of Jupiter's moons like wolves waiting in tall grass. And Do-hyun recorded a message that was broadcast to every person on Earth. His voice was steady and calm, the way a father speaks to his family before a storm. "They are coming," he said. "They have 1,200 ships, and they believe that is enough. They believe we are soft. They believe we are weak. They believe we will kneel. They have made the worst mistake of their civilization, and we are going to teach them why." On the edge of the solar system, a Veshan scout drone completed its scan of Earth. It analyzed the planet's gravity, radiation, atmospheric toxicity, and seismic activity. It searched for military installations and found almost nothing, because Sarah had made sure it would find almost nothing. The drone sent its final report back to the fleet. The report was short. It said anomalous and recommended abort. Grand Commander Rolkis read the report, deleted it, and ordered the fleet to increase speed. The drone floated in the darkness, alone and forgotten. If it had been capable of feeling anything, it might have felt sorry for the fleet it was trying to warn. But it was just a machine, so it simply shut down and drifted, one more piece of debris in a solar system that was about to become very, very dangerous. The Veshan fleet dropped out of warp near Jupiter, and for a moment, the bridge of the axiom of silence was filled with the kind of silence that comes before something terrible. Grand Commander Rolkis stood at the viewport and looked at the solar system spread out before him. It was ordinary, a yellow star, a handful of rocky planets, a few gas giants, and there, small and blue and impossibly far away, was Earth. It looked fragile from here. It looked like something he could crush in his hand. "Standard formation," Rolkis ordered. "Begin approach. Broadcast the surrender demand on all frequencies." The message went out in every language the Dominion had catalogued, though they had only recently added the human tongues. It was the same message they had sent to 400 worlds before. "Surrender your planet. Lay down your weapons. Submit to the Dominion. Resistance will be met with total destruction." Then there was silence. Long, empty silence that stretched across the void between Jupiter and the inner system. Rolkis waited. He was used to quick responses. Most species answered within seconds, their voices full of fear and confusion. Some begged, some cried, some tried to negotiate. All of them eventually broke. 60 seconds passed. Then the speakers crackled, and a voice came through. It was calm, steady, translated perfectly into the Veshan language, with no errors, which meant the humans had been studying them long before this moment. "This is Supreme Commander Han Do-hyun of Earth. You have entered the territory of a Class 15 Deathworld. You were warned. You were classified. You came anyway. We will not ask you to leave. We will not negotiate. You have already lost. You simply do not know it yet. What follows is not a battle. It is a lesson." The channel closed. Rolkis stared at the speakers. It was a short, sharp sound that echoed through the bridge. Brave words from a species that has never left its own star. "Continue approach." Behind him, Sub-Commander Thien did not laugh. He looked at the tactical display and noticed something that made his stomach tighten. The human had not sounded afraid. He had not sounded desperate. He had sounded like someone who had already won and was simply waiting for the other side to realize it. The fleet moved inward, past Jupiter and into the asteroid belt. This was routine. Every system had debris fields, and the Dominion ships were built to handle minor impacts. But the first explosion was not minor. A rock the size of a transport shuttle hit the lead cruiser at a speed that should not have been possible for a natural object. It tore through the ship's shields and split it in half. Before the debris had finished spinning, 3 more impacts hit 3 more ships. Then 20. Alarms screamed across the fleet. Officers shouted reports over each other. 40 ships were destroyed in the first 6 minutes. Rolkis gripped the railing of the command platform. "What is happening?" he demanded. "Kinetic projectiles," war analyst Prevon reported, his voice tight with controlled panic. "They have placed accelerators throughout the asteroid belt. They are launching rocks at relativistic speeds. The objects are too small for our long-range sensors to detect, and too fast for our shields to fully absorb." "They are throwing rocks at us?" Rolkis said, disbelief in his voice. "Yes, Grand Commander, and it is working." The fleet tightened formation and pushed through the belt, losing ships with every passing minute. Rolkis ordered increased shield power and point defense fire, but the projectiles were so small and so fast that the defense systems could not track them all. It was like trying to stop rain with a sword. And then behind the fleet, the real attack began. Captain Park Jinu had been waiting in the shadow of Ganymede for 72 hours. His stealth destroyers ran cold, their engines shut down, their hulls coated in signal-absorbing material that made them invisible to Veshan sensors. Jinu sat in his command chair and watched the Veshan fleet pass by like a parade of glowing targets. He waited until the fleet was fully committed to the asteroid belt. Then he gave the order. 12 stealth destroyers decloaked simultaneously behind the fleet and fired. They did not aim for the warships. They aimed for the supply vessels, the fuel carriers, the medical ships, the food transports, the soft targets, the things an army needs to survive. The attack lasted 4 minutes. Jinu's ships destroyed 38 supply vessels, crippled 12 more, and vanished back into the darkness before the Veshan warships could turn around. On the bridge of the Axiom of Silence, Rolkis watched his logistics network burn. He understood immediately what the humans had done. They had not tried to destroy his fleet. They had tried to starve it. "Find those ships," he snarled, but the stealth destroyers were already gone, repositioned, running cold again, waiting for the next opportunity. Deep in the data center of the flagship, Prevon was drowning in information. His screens were filled with data about Earth's military capabilities, and every new piece of information was worse than the last. But the thing that broke him was not a weapon. It was a concept. He found it in Earth's historical database, filed under military doctrine. It was called Total War. The definition was simple. In a total war, every person becomes a soldier. Every factory becomes a weapons plant. Every resource is directed toward the fight. There is no separation between the military and the civilians. The entire civilization becomes a single weapon pointed at the enemy. No galactic species operated this way. When a species lost its military, it surrendered. That was the rule. That was how the galaxy worked. Humans did not follow this rule. Humans did not have a separate military caste. In an existential war, every single one of those 9 billion people would fight. The farmers would fight. The teachers would fight. The children's parents would fight. The old would fight. They would fight with weapons if they had them, and with rocks and sticks and bare hands if they did not. Prevon ran to the bridge. He pushed past officers and stood before Rolkis, trembling. "Commander, we need to retreat. Now. Immediately." "Explain." "They are not defending their world the way other species defend their worlds. They have turned the entire planet into a weapon. The asteroid belt, the moons, the debris fields, all of it is rigged. And when we reach the planet, it will be worse. Their gravity will crush our soldiers. Their air will poison them. Their bacteria will kill them. And the humans themselves, every single one of them, will fight us until they are dead. There is no surrender point. There is no breaking point. They do not have one." Rolkis stared at him for a long moment. Then he struck Prevon across the face, hard enough to send the analyst stumbling. "You are a coward. Get off my bridge." Prevon left, blood running from his mouth. He went back to his data center and sat down in front of his screens. He was not angry. He was not hurt. He was simply sad. because he knew what was going to happen next, and he knew that no one was going to listen to him until it was too late. Outside, the fleet pushed on toward Earth, and as it moved, thousands of small objects launched from hidden platforms throughout the system. They were drones, cheap, fast, disposable, and numerous beyond counting. They did not carry heavy weapons. They carried something worse. The drones attached themselves to Veshan hulls like insects landing on skin. They bored through armor with simple cutting tools. Some injected computer viruses into the ship's systems. Some released biological payloads into ventilation networks, common Earth bacteria that were harmless to humans, but devastating to Veshan biology. Within hours, Veshan soldiers began getting sick. It started with coughing, then fever, then bleeding from their respiratory membranes. The medical ships that could have treated them were burning wreckage behind the fleet, courtesy of Captain Park Jinu. On the bridge, Thien pulled up Earth's cultural database one more time. He found an entry that Prevon had flagged weeks ago. It described a military strategy called Scorched Earth. The translation read, "If we cannot hold it, no one will." Thien closed the file. He looked out at the stars and understood something that Ralkus still refused to see. They had not invaded a planet. They had not entered a battle. They had walked into a trap that had been set 30 years ago, by a species that had been fighting for its survival since before it could walk upright. They had walked into a cage, and the door had already closed behind them. The Veshan fleet reached Earth's orbit expecting a desperate dying world making its last stand. What they found instead was Yoon Sarah waiting for them. She sat in her command bunker beneath the Korean mountains, surrounded by screens that showed every ship, every missile, and every piece of debris in orbit. She had spent 3 months calibrating the orbital defense grid until it was perfect. She knew the position of every satellite, every platform, and every piece of space junk that circled the planet. She had turned all of it into a weapon. The grid activated in sequence. The first ring of platforms opened fire with kinetic rounds. Simple metal slugs accelerated to incredible speeds. They punched through Veshan shields like needles through paper. The second ring used directed energy weapons that cut across hulls in burning lines. The third ring did something no one in the galaxy had ever seen before. It used magnetic fields to redirect Earth's own space debris, the thousands of dead satellites and broken rocket parts that had been floating in orbit for decades, and hurled them into the Veshan formation. Earth had weaponized its own garbage. Sarah directed the defense like a surgeon performing an operation. Her voice never changed. She called out targets in a calm, steady tone, and the platforms responded with mechanical precision. She found the gaps in the Veshan formation and poured fire into them. She identified the command ships and isolated them. She broke the fleet into smaller groups, and then broke those groups into even smaller ones. Ralkus watched his fleet come apart around him. Ships were burning in every direction. His communications network was failing as the human-computer viruses spread from ship to ship. His soldiers were sick and getting sicker. And the planet below him, that small blue world that he had dismissed as a soft target, was killing his fleet with the efficiency of a machine. In desperation, he ordered what he had never needed to order before, a ground invasion. The drop pods launched from the surviving troop carriers and fell toward Earth's surface like metal rain. Thousands of Veshan soldiers, the Dominion's finest, descended through the atmosphere toward the continents below. They had conquered worlds before. They had marched through alien cities and planted the Dominion's flag on 100 different soils. They believed they could do it again. They were wrong. The first thing that hit them was the gravity. Earth's gravitational pull was nearly 3 times what Veshan bodies were built for. The soldiers stumbled out of their drop pods and immediately felt the weight crushing down on their joints and spines. Every step was an effort. Every movement was slow and painful. Their weapons felt twice as heavy. Their armor dragged them down like anchors. The second thing was the air. Earth's atmosphere was an oxidizing mix that burned their respiratory membranes. They had filters, but the filters were designed for short exposure, not extended combat. Within an hour, their breathing became labored. Within 3 hours, some of them were choking. The third thing was the planet itself. The Veshan soldiers landed in jungles where the heat and humidity felt like being buried alive. They landed in mountain ranges where the cold cracked their armor seals. They landed in cities that had been evacuated and rigged with traps, buildings wired with explosives, streets flooded with toxins, tunnels that led nowhere. And then there were the insects, small, biting, relentless creatures that crawled into every gap in their armor. The Veshan soldiers had never encountered anything like them. On their homeworld, there were no such things. On Earth, they were everywhere, and they carried bacteria that the alien immune systems had no defense against. General Cho Taeho watched the ground invasion from his command post and felt something close to pity. He had prepared for this fight his entire career. He had trained his soldiers in every environment Earth had to offer. They knew how to fight in the mountains, in the jungles, in the deserts, in the frozen poles, and in the ruined streets of abandoned cities. They were built for this world because this world had built them. He did not deploy his main forces. He did not need to. He let the planet do the work. The heat, the cold, the gravity, the bacteria, the insects, the weather. A sudden rainstorm in one landing zone flooded the Veshan positions and shorted out their equipment. A dust storm in another blinded their sensors and buried their vehicles. The planet was fighting for itself, and it was winning. Taeho sent cleanup squads only when the Veshan soldiers were too weak to resist. His people moved through the landing zones like ghosts, quick and quiet, finishing what the planet had started. The entire ground invasion collapsed in less than a day. In orbit, something even more devastating was happening. Khan Nari had hacked into the Veshan fleet's internal communication network, using the virus pathways the drones had already established. She began broadcasting directly to every Veshan soldier on every ship. Her voice was calm and professional, the voice of a scientist giving a lecture. She explained, in simple and precise terms, exactly what Earth's biosphere was doing to their bodies. She described the bacteria that were colonizing their lungs, breaking down the tissue membrane by membrane. She described the parasites that had entered their water supply through contaminated ventilation systems. She described the effects of Earth's UV radiation on their unshielded skin, how it was causing cellular damage that their biology could not repair. She was not threatening them, she was educating them, and that was what made it so terrifying. Panic spread through the fleet like fire. Soldiers on 3 different ships refused to follow orders. A mutiny broke out on a cruiser near the edge of the formation. Medical officers were overwhelmed with patients they could not treat, because the bacteria were unlike anything in their databases. Rolkis stood on his bridge and screamed orders at officers who were no longer listening. His fleet was broken. His soldiers were dying. His invasion was a disaster. For the first time in his life, he felt something he did not recognize at first. It took him a moment to understand what it was. It was fear. He ordered a full retreat. Every ship, turn around, maximum speed, get out of this system. But when the fleet tried to move, they found that Dohyeon's reserve ships had repositioned behind them during the battle. The stealth destroyers, the orbital platforms, and a fresh wing of warships that had been hiding on the far side of the moon now formed a wall between the Veshan fleet and open space. The exit was closed. Dohyeon's voice came over the communications channel one final time. I told you, this is not a battle. It is a lesson, and you will carry this lesson home, those of you we allow to leave. Sub-Commander Thien stood on the bridge of his own ship, the Pale Wind, and made his decision. He had watched Rolkis lead them into this disaster. He had watched good soldiers die for nothing. He had watched the most powerful fleet in the Dominion's history be torn apart by a species that used rocks and bacteria and garbage as weapons. He was done. He opened a channel to every ship under his direct command, nearly 300 vessels, and ordered them to stand down. Then he broadcast a surrender on all human frequencies. The surrender was accepted within minutes. A human shuttle docked with the Pale Wind, and Thyan walked to the airlock to meet them. The delegation was small, 4 soldiers and 1 officer, Yoon Sarah. Thyan looked at her. She was smaller than he expected. All humans were smaller than he expected. But her eyes were steady and her posture was straight, and she looked at him the way a predator looks at something that is no longer a threat. He knelt before her because his legs would not hold him anymore. "We did not know what you were," he said. Sarah looked at him for a long moment. Her expression did not change. Then she said, quietly and without any cruelty in her voice, "Now you do." On the bridge of the Axiom of Silence, Rolkis sat alone. His crew had surrendered or fled to other ships. The flagship drifted in orbit, crippled and dark, lit only by the glow of the planet turning slowly below. He pulled up Pravam's full report, the one he had ignored, the one he had struck the analyst for presenting. The last line read, Class 15, not a planet to be conquered, a predator to be avoided. Recommendation, do not engage, do not provoke, do not return. He stared at those words for a long time, the blue light of Earth reflected in his eyes. He whispered to the empty bridge, to no one, to himself, "What have I done?" The planet did not answer. It did not need to. It had already said everything it needed to say. When the counting was done, the numbers told a story that the galaxy would remember for a very long time. Of the 1,200 ships that Grand Commander Rolkis had brought to the Sol system, 743 were destroyed. 298 had surrendered with Sub-Commander Thayan. The remaining 159 were damaged, drifting, and barely functional. Their crews were sick, starving, and broken in ways that had nothing to do with their bodies. Earth's losses were 11 ships and 2,400 soldiers. When this number reached the Veshan Dominion, the intelligence officers who received it assumed it was a translation error. They checked it 3 times. They checked it a 4th time. A species that had never fought a galactic war had destroyed the largest fleet in the Dominion's history and had lost almost nothing doing it. Han Do-hyun gave the order to let the surviving Veshan ships leave. He did not do this out of mercy, though he was not a cruel man. He did it because he wanted them to go home. He wanted them to dock at their stations and walk through their cities and tell every single person they met what had happened at Earth. He wanted the story to spread. He wanted the galaxy to hear it. But first, there was the matter of Rolkis. The Grand Commander was found alone on his flagship, sitting in the dark on a bridge that no longer had power. He did not resist when the human soldiers came for him. He did not speak. He walked between them with the slow, empty movements of a man who had lost everything and knew it. They brought him to a small room on a military station in Earth's orbit. It was simple. A table, 2 chairs, a window that looked out at the planet below. Han Do-hyun was waiting for him. Do-hyun did not gloat. He did not threaten. He poured 2 cups of tea and set one in front of Rolkis. Then he sat down and waited. They sat in silence for a long time. The tea cooled. Earth turned slowly outside the window, blue and green and wrapped in white clouds. It looked peaceful from up here. It looked like the kind of place where nothing dangerous could possibly live. Rolkis finally spoke. His voice was hollow. "You could have destroyed every ship. You could have killed all of us. Why did you let them go?" "Because dead soldiers do not tell stories," Do-hyun said. "Living ones do." Another silence. Rolkis stared at the tea he had not touched. I have conquered 400 worlds. I have never lost. I have never even come close to losing. I looked at your planet, and I saw nothing that frightened me. I know, Do-hyun said. It was not a military question. It was not a strategic question. It was the question of someone who had looked into something vast and dark and did not understand what he had seen. Do-hyun picked up his tea and took a slow sip. We are what happens when a Deathworld gets tired of waiting to be found. Rolkis was sent home on a transport ship with a small escort. He would face judgment in the Dominion for his failure, and Do-hyun knew it, but that was not Earth's concern. Earth had delivered its message. What the Dominion did with it was their own business. The message spread faster than anyone expected. The galaxy had a communication network that moved information at the speed of light across thousands of systems, and the story of Earth's victory traveled through it like a shockwave. Within weeks, every major civilization knew what had happened. Within months, the political landscape of the galaxy began to change. Species that had been conquered by the Veshan Dominion began to rebel. Small worlds that had lived in fear for generations suddenly found their courage. Because if a single planet on the edge of the galaxy could break the Dominion's greatest fleet, then maybe the Dominion was not as invincible as it claimed. Uprisings spread across a dozen systems. The Dominion, weakened and humiliated, could not contain them all. The Galactic Council, a loose assembly of the galaxy's most powerful civilizations, held an emergency session to discuss Earth. They had ignored the Sol system for centuries. Now they could not afford to ignore it any longer. After weeks of debate, they issued a new classification for Earth. It read, Class 15, Apex Deathworld, Status, Sovereign, Contact Protocol, Absolute Caution. No species was to approach Earth without explicit permission. No fleet was to enter the Sol system without invitation. Below the official classification, a single note was added. It was written by war analyst Pravan, who had requested and been granted asylum on Earth. He had walked its mountains and breathed its air with the help of a specially designed breathing apparatus. And he had watched its people go about their ordinary lives with the quiet awe of someone who finally understood what he was looking at. His note read, They are not cruel. They are not evil. They are simply what survival made them. And they remember what it was like to be small. Treat them with respect, and they will be the most loyal allies the galaxy has ever seen. Threaten them, and no fleet in the universe will save you. Earth did not become a conqueror. That had never been the plan. Do-hyun had fought to protect his world, not to rule others. But he understood that the galaxy was watching, and he understood that this moment would define humanity's place among the stars for generations to come. He established the Terran Accord, an open alliance available to any species that wanted protection. Earth would defend any world that asked for help, not for payment, not for territory, not for power, simply because it was the right thing to do. Kang Nari, who had become Earth's most famous voice in the galactic community, explained it best during a broadcast that was translated into 300 alien languages. We grew up on a world that tried to kill us every single day, she said. We know what it is like to survive against the odds. We know what it is like to be small and alone and afraid. And we will be damned if we let anyone else face that alone. Dozens of species joined the Accord in its first year. Some were small and weak and had been bullied for centuries. Some were larger and simply tired of living in fear. All of them found the same thing when they reached out to Earth. Humans were fierce and terrifying in battle, but outside of battle they were warm and loud and generous, in ways that confused almost every alien species they encountered. They shared food, they told jokes, they formed bonds with creatures that looked nothing like them, and defended those bonds with their lives. The galaxy did not know what to make of this. A Deathworld species that fought like demons and then turned around and adopted alien orphans. It did not fit any model they had. Park Jinu volunteered for a permanent posting at the edge of the Sol system. He took the Ironwake to the outer boundary and held position, a lone sentinel watching the stars. His crew rotated out every 6 months, but Jinu always stayed. When a journalist asked him why he chose such a lonely assignment, he looked out at the viewport for a long time before answering. Because someone should be the first to say hello, he said, and the last to say goodbye. 6 months after the battle, Yoon Sera sat in her command center beneath the Korean mountains. The defense grid was stronger than ever. New platforms had been built. New weapons had been developed. Earth was more protected than it had ever been, and Sarah was the one who made sure it stayed that way. Her screens showed the usual quiet of monitored space, comets, radiation, the slow movement of distant things. She was reaching for her coffee when a new signal appeared. It was faint and far away, coming from the other side of the galaxy. It was a distress signal, broadcast on a frequency that Earth's systems had only recently learned to detect. She cleaned up the signal and translated it. It was from a small species she had never heard of. They were frightened. A larger empire was threatening their world. They were asking if anyone could hear them. They were asking if anyone cared. Sarah opened a channel to Do-hyun. "Commander, someone needs our help." There was a pause. Then his voice, calm as it had always been, calm as it would always be, came through the speaker. "Then let us go introduce ourselves." Sarah smiled. It was a small smile, the kind that meant she was already working. She began plotting a course, and as she did, she thought about something Kang Nari had said during the war. "We are the monster that the monster planet created." It was true, but monsters could choose what they fought for, and Earth had made its choice. Out at the edge of the system, the Ironwake turned its sensors toward the distant signal and began to move. Behind it, Earth turned in the darkness, blue and green and alive. A Deathworld, a home. The galaxy had spent 1,000 years classifying worlds, ranking them, measuring them, deciding which ones mattered and which ones did not. They had built systems and scales and categories for everything. And then they had found a small blue planet that broke every system, shattered every scale, and rewrote every category. They called it a Class 15 Deathworld. They said it could not be conquered. They were right. But what they did not understand, what Ralkus learned too late, what Thyan grasped only on his knees, what Pravan tried desperately to warn them all, was that Earth's greatest weapon was never its gravity, or its storms, or its soldiers. It was the simple, terrifying fact that humans had already survived the worst the universe could throw at them, and they had done it together. The commanders finally understood their doom, not when the fleet burned, not when the soldiers fell, not when the surrender was signed, but when they realized that the small blue world had never been afraid of them, not even for a single moment.